So is Apple really getting into bed with Intel? Well, not really, but it's a metaphor of what may be happening between the two companies for the next couple of years. And for an old timer like me, it's really quite shocking. Hi, I'm Don Bullock, and welcome to the Tech iHound, where I sniff out news from Apple Computer and related technologies that I use here in my office studio and in my home. Recently, I've been rather mute on Apple's developments and news. While Apple continues to incremental improvements to their products, I just haven't seemed to have had anything that was really what I thought was mind-blowing or unusual. That is, until now. Something came up this week that seemed to be beyond where I thought Apple was going. It got my attention because of my personal history with Apple Computer. I started back in the 1970s working with Apple IIs. The first computer I bought was an Apple IIc, and eventually I got my first Mac, a Macintosh SE. If this news is true, it may help Apple diversify their supply chain as well as saving Intel from oblivion. Ming-Chi Kuo posted a leak on X, which was quickly reported in Mac Rumors and other sources, including Apple News sites as well as business sites. But those reports didn't seem to grasp the significance of this story. According to Kuo, Apple plans to be turning to Intel to manufacture some of their chips. He says that Apple has a non-disclosure agreement with Intel to acquire the company's 18AP PDK 0.9.1 GA chips. That's such a catchy name. Can't they come up with something better? Intel is expected to begin shipping Apple's lowest-end M processor. That's the basic M-series chips, not the Max or the Pro or whatever, as early as 2027. Considering Apple's recent history with Intel, this is an interesting development and one that I just couldn't believe when I heard it. The demise of Intel has been a top tech story for several years. Their x86-based processors had gone through a great run, but Intel has had difficulty going any farther with it. They became stagnant and lost most of their customers. I distinctly remember when the Intel 8088, a cost-effective variant of the x86, was chosen by IBM for its original 5150 personal computer in 1981 due to its lower cost and compatibility with the existing 8-bit components. Yes, this was the first PC. This move cemented the x86 architecture as the industry standard and lent legitimacy to the microprocessor-based computers, paving the way for the PC architecture we still see in 85% of the desktop computers today, and that's worldwide. I remember at the time there were no standards. All the microcomputers, as they were called back then, used their own operating systems. None of them were compatible to anything else. It was a mess, a real mess, believe me. The introduction of the original PC from IBM and their use of the Intel chips and MS-DOS as an operating system quickly led to the PC clones because the IBM components that they used were readily available off the shelf that anyone could use in their computers. So everyone could use the components in an IBM computer and the operating system. IBM also adopted an open architecture, so all of this made it easy for the clones, and they could replicate what IBM did legally. There was nothing here that IBM could patent at the time. So they were open to being cloned very easily. I personally never bought an IBM PC, but I had several of the first Tandy 1000 PC clones in 1984 that used the 8088 chip, and I had a chance to be one of the first people to use what was touted at the time to be the first portable computer made by Compaq that used these same chips. Wow, have things changed since then. By the way, lugging that Compaq computer that was sort of the heavy in size of a sewing machine around a convention center in Dallas, Texas, was really difficult. I remember, I think I turned it back in after having it for a couple of hours. I just couldn't stand the weight and trying to carry it from one place to another. Besides, plugging it in was almost impossible. There was no battery in it. But I used those Tandy 1000s for several years, plus several other brands of PC clones afterwards. Apple switched to PowerPC processors in March of 1994 with the launch of the first Power Macintosh. Apple switched to the PowerPC for higher performance and better efficiency. Then at WWDC on June 6, 2005, Apple announced the switch from PowerPC to Intel processors and released the first Intel base Macs. They started using Intel x86 Core Solo, Core Duo, and Core Duo 2 processors. The move was because the Intel processors added better performance and power efficiency than the PowerPC chips. Sound familiar? At the time, this switch allowed the development of more advanced products and particularly laptops that were not possible with the existing PowerPC roadmap. Since we're talking about Apple here, we also have to consider that Intel's management turned down the opportunity to create the first chip for the iPhone. Yep, they turned down Steve Jobs' offer, believing the power margins for a low-cost mobile chip wouldn't be high enough compared to their existing business. And in 2006, before the iPhone launch, they sold that business. Intel actually sold its ARM-based scale processor business to Marvell because it wanted to double down on its x86 Atom platform. That left Intel without a competitive ARM product to offer to Apple. Well, was that a bad move, as we know today? I guess back then it wasn't. For many years, due to its adoption by IBM and subsequently Apple, as well as many makers of PC clones, Intel was at the top of the heap for computer chip makers. Intel was primarily focused on their highly profitable, high-margin x86 processors for the PC and server markets. They were flying high until the mid-1990s. In the mid-1990s, Intel started to face architectural limitations that prompted them to pursue alternative paths, leading to key developments and strategic shifts. Reports surfaced regarding Intel's 10-nanometer process that was intended to be a major generational leap, with high transistor density that was technically superior to the competitors' 7-nanometer nodes at the time. However, the development of these chips led to significant problems at Intel. These 10-nanometer chips, originally slated to be released in 2016, were delayed multiple times, only reaching high-volume production years later, around 2019 and 2020. So that was a long time. By which points, rivals like AMD were already on 7 nanometers, something that Intel just couldn't seem to be capable of matching. These struggles allowed competitors, and notably AMD, to leverage external foundries like Global Foundries and eventually TSMC to produce more advanced, energy-efficient chips on a more reliable schedule, leading to significant market share shifts. In 1991, they had a breakdown in relationship with Intel, and so AMD released an AM386, a reverse-engineered clone of the Intel 386 processor. after overcoming some legal battles. These issues with Intel and the rise of AMD was probably what forced Apple to really start thinking about creating their own chips. I remember these years when the innovation at Apple was delayed due to a failure of Intel to create new chips, and some of my friends even had switched to AMD. Even before Steve Jobs passed, he criticized Intel directly, according to his biography. He wasn't known for his tact. Where power efficiency was crucial, he described Intel as really slow, lacking flexibility compared to Apple's pace. Jobs also noted that while Intel was strong with high-performance chips, they didn't prioritize power efficiency and cost as much. Jobs significantly mentioned their graphics capabilities as a weakness. While no specific delayed product names were widely announced by Apple as being Intel's fault, Tim Cook discussed the supply chain issues regarding Intel processor constraints during Apple's fiscal Q2 2019 earnings call. Tim Cook stated that the processor constraints in the March quarter led to a 5% decline in Mac revenue, and that revenue would have increased without these constraints. Apple's CFO, Luca Maestri, also attributed the Mac revenue decline to processor constraints on certain models. These comments highlighted the impact of Intel's supply issues, and looking back on it, they were sort of sounding a signal to the investors of things that were coming. Rumors of Apple using its own ARM-based silicon chips in Macs had first surfaced in around 2011. More concrete reports and information emerged later, with 2014 seeing claims that Apple was testing ARM-based prototypes, and by 2018 we started hearing really strong rumors that Apple was working on their own chips for their Macs and hoped to have them ready by 2020. In a move similar to the switch from PowerPC to Intel, Apple announced the plan to switch its Mac lineup to its own Apple Silicon at WWDC on June 22, 2020. They stated it would happen over the following 2 years. Subsequently, Apple unveiled their M1 chip on November 10, 2020 at a special event. The chip was launched in 3 Mac products: the MacBook Air, the 13-inch MacBook Pro, and the Mac Mini. The M1 was the first ARM-based system on a chip, or SoC, significantly designed for Apple to put in its Mac line. I distinctly remember both events. At the time, my 2014 iMac was showing signs of wear and tear and was very outdated. I was thinking of upgrading it just about the time the rumors surfaced in 2018. So I decided, now hold off. As we all remember vividly at the 2020 WWDC event, Tim Cook made the following announcement.
The Mac has always been about innovation and bold change. In June, we announced that the Mac is taking another huge leap forward by transitioning to Apple Silicon. And we promised that the first Mac with Apple Silicon would arrive by the end of this year. Well, that day is here.
After that announcement by Tim Cook, I warned my wife that we'd have a big computer purchase sometime in 2020 or 2021. Then when the 24-inch iMac was introduced, April 2021, I was tempted, but I wanted a bigger screen. Late in the afternoon, the day before the March 8, 2022 Apple event, Luke Miani announced on his YouTube channel that the Mac Studio and Studio Display were being announced the next day. And he even showed some examples on his video. That evening, after I watched Luke's video, I told my wife to be ready for a big computer purchase coming up within the next week. As most of you know, soon after the announcement and the performance reports had been published, I bought the M1 Max Mac Studio that I'm using today, along with the Studio Display to go with it. Since the change to Apple Silicon for the Macs, the relationship between Intel and Apple has been strained at best. Both companies carried out their dispute openly. When Apple first announced the transition, Intel's comment was formal and slightly defensive, stating that Apple was still a customer in other areas and that Intel chips were the most open platform for developers, both today and in the future. Apple executives did not make direct public attacks, but made it clear in product announcements and interviews that the move was driven by the need for better performance, power efficiency, and a unified ecosystem, areas where they felt Intel was stagnating. Better performance and power efficiency. That sounds familiar. Apple stated that its goal was to provide the best personal computers in the world, which implied that the Intel roadmap no longer met those standards. During the 2020 WWDC announcement of the transition, Apple emphasized evaluating chips on performance per watt, not just raw performance. The M1, according to them, delivered industry-leading efficiency, significantly longer battery life than their Intel-based processors had. Intel's response to all this started in 2021 with their Go PC campaign of advertising, featuring former I'm a Mac actor Justin Long.
Hello, I'm Justin. Just a real person doing a real comparison between Mac and PC. Come on.
They directly targeted Apple's M1 Macs by highlighting PC's advantages like gaming and the wide variety of laptops that are available with Intel chips compared to the MacBooks. Now, especially for people like me that remember all this, Apple going back to Intel is somewhat of a shock. So why? Why are they doing this? To find a possible answer, Ming-Chi Kuo said the following, quote, "My latest industry surveys, however, indicate that the visibility on Intel becoming an advanced node supplier to Apple has recently improved significantly." End quote. For Apple, it would allow them to satisfy the government's desire for chips made in America and provide them with an additional source for their chips. For Intel, it would provide them with a significant win for their business, and the worst may soon be over. They could start looking ahead and hopefully capture more orders from Apple and additional Tier 1 customers. Apple's plan, if this goes forward, is for Intel to begin shipping its lowest-end M processor utilizing the 18AP advanced node as early as the middle of 2027. But the actual timeline is contingent on how much progress Intel makes between now and then. Just remember, Apple will still be the designer, and unlike times past, Intel will act as a fab for their chips, not the designer. Apple's lowest-end M processor that's mainly used currently in the MacBook with sales of roughly 20 million units for 2025 is what Kuo thinks Intel will be producing. The rumor of a MacBook Air using an iPhone A series chip, if that's true, the lowest in M1 processor in both 2026 and 2027 are expected to be between 15 and 20 million units. Kuo states these numbers are relatively small, so virtually have no material impact on TMC's fundamentals or its technology leadership over the next several years. However, the signaling and trend implications of all this are very significant for both Intel and Apple. While Apple is clearly expected to remain highly dependent on TSMC's advanced nodes for the foreseeable future, having Intel produce chips for them allows them to show strong support of the government's strongly promoted Made in the USA policy, and Apple also sees the need to secure second source to meet supply chain management requirements, and this will help. For Intel, the significance of winning Apple's advanced node orders far exceeds the direct revenue and profit contributions from this business. While they still won't be able to compete head-to-head with TSMC over the next several years, the deal will give Intel time and the funds to continue making chips and planning for improvements. Looking ahead, the 14A node they're working towards and beyond could capture more orders from Apple and other Tier 1 customers, turning Intel's long-term outlook to be more positive. With this simple move, there are three outcomes. Apple is no longer 100% lashed to Taiwan. Washington gets a clean, photogenic, made in America industry policy win, and TSMC goes from the only answer to the best answer for Apple. For Intel, this isn't an earnings per share catalyst, though right after close post, Intel Corporation stock jumped 7.9%. Getting into Apple's process design kit pipeline, and by the way, these kits contain all the necessary information and models for designers to create integrated circuits that can be successfully manufactured using that specific process technology, means that 18A finally graduates from somewhat of a sideline theory to a node that every major player has to evaluate seriously. Intel has a lot riding on this. The move would suddenly connect Apple, Intel, TSMC, and Washington. According to an Intel press release, the government purchased 433.3 million primary shares of stock at $20.47 per share, equaling 9.9%. This deal is meant to reshape the current supply for semiconductor chips and move some of the production out of Taiwan, which may eventually affect their dominance on high-end chip production. Yahoo Finance brings up some interesting questions. If Apple taps Intel to manufacture its future M-series chips, is it possible the move could make production cheaper, as TSMC wouldn't be the only company responsible for making Apple's best chips? In addition, could this make upcoming processors even better, as both manufacturers would fight to get the latest technologies and offer them to Apple? It will be interesting to see if Apple and Intel can pull this off, considering all the recent problems Intel has had and how strict Apple is with their requirements for chip quality assurance and productivity requirements. It's going to be something we'll look at and see if Apple and Intel can go through this and make it a success. Many people these days have been saying that Apple's reliance on China and Taiwan may someday cause their downfall. They think that Apple needs to spread out the supply chain away from these single sources. This may be a big step in that direction. If this new partnership succeeds, what happens? Will TSMC be upset about the move, or will they be able to concentrate more on development and the production of new high-end chips? Will it be what helps Intel bounce back from the danger of going under? Will Intel step up its ability to compete with companies like TSMC? If the deal goes through, will we see cost of Apple products come down if the price of the chips are reduced? As an aside, the timing of this supposed deal is ironic. Apple announced just after their June WWDC 2025 keynote that it's finally ditching technical support for Intel's x86 base Macs, starting with Mac OS 27 in the fall of 2026. This deal had to be underway when Apple made that announcement. What are your thoughts on Apple reaching out and working with Intel again? If this and some of the other rumors I'm seeing are true, I'll definitely have more to say about Apple in 2026, so subscribe. Click on that notification bell and watch for notifications. Over here are a couple of videos I think you'd be interested in. I greatly appreciate your support. Please give this video that thumbs up. It'll help me a lot. I plan to keep on top of this development, and thank you all very much for watching.